They were not schools in the modern sense. There were no desks, no exams, no diplomas, only thresholds and silence. Because mystery was not something taught, it was something entered. And once you crossed that invisible line, nothing was ever the same again. The mystery schools were never about acquiring knowledge. They were about losing who you thought you were. They were designed not to educate, but to initiate. And that difference is everything. Initiation is not learning, it is dying. Not the death of the body, but the death of the known self. And that death was sacred. Hidden behind veils of symbol, story, and silence, the ancient mystery schools offered something rare, dangerous, and irrevocable. A way to pierce the illusion, to dissolve the personal, to remember what was lost before you were born. But make no mistake, this path was not open to all. Not because it was elitist, because it was volatile. Most were not ready. And those who entered did not always return the same. The temples of Egypt, the caves of Eleusis, the druidic groves, the inner chambers of the Essenes, they all guarded the same threshold, a point beyond which the world began to unmake itself. Time fractured, language failed, and identity, that precious illusion, shattered like glass. They did not promise enlightenment. They promised disassembly. To become an initiate was to offer up your certainty, your ambition, your name. In return, you would receive nothing. Nothing you could show, nothing you could prove. Only a change in vibration, an inner silence so deep it began to speak without sound. What was hidden behind those walls was not information, it was transformation. And it could not be carried by words. That's why these schools did not write, they encoded in symbols, in geometry, in rituals that looked like theater, but were actually maps of the soul's dismemberment. Because the mystery was not a secret, it was an experience. And experience cannot be told, only endured, only absorbed, only survived. Some were chosen, some volunteered, but none truly knew what they were walking into. And that was the point, because the mystery required innocence, not ignorance, but a willingness to step beyond belief, to enter a space where the self would be stripped bare, not judged but dissolved. Why? Because only in that surrender could something deeper awaken. Something older than the personality, something truer than the story. The mystery schools did not serve individuals, they served evolution. And the ones who passed through them, those who emerged on the other side, were not just wise, they were empty. Emptied of ego, of performance, of the inner war between self and truth. They returned to the world, not as teachers, but as resonators. Their presence carried something others could feel, but not name, because the real curriculum was transmission. And the price of that transmission was total internal reordering. Those who sought power failed. Those who sought status never found the gate. Only those willing to walk blind, to be unmade, to give up the illusion of control, found what they didn't know they were seeking. The self behind the self, the silence behind the world, the eternal behind the form. And so the mystery schools kept their secrets, not because they were selfish, but because they were sacred. Not everyone was meant to enter, and not everyone who entered was meant to return. But those who did returned different. They carried no badge, no authority, only a frequency. And in that frequency, the truth moved. Not loudly, not clearly, but powerfully, unmistakably, quiet as breath, strong as stone. That is the veil of initiation. It is not something you peek behind. It is something you dissolve into. And what it reveals is not new. It is what has always been, waiting. They could have written it down. They could have spoken it aloud. They could have told you everything. But they didn't. Because the truth they carried was not meant to be explained. It was meant to be remembered. And remembering requires a different kind of language. A language older than words. A language the soul already knows. The mystery schools spoke in symbols. Not as metaphors, but as keys. Not as decoration, but as encoded instructions hidden in plain sight. A serpent coiled around a staff, an eye within a triangle, a square within a circle, a labyrinth drawn in sacred proportions, a veil of stars, a chalice, a flame. None of it was random. Every curve, every placement, every silence between shapes was intentional. Because the symbol was not an answer, it was an invitation. To feel, to resonate, to decode not with the mind, but with the body, the dreams, the subtle perception beneath intellect. The untrained mind sees a glyph. The initiate feels a vibration. That was the point. To pass truth not through teaching, but through transmission. Because the deepest truths cannot be told, they must be awakened. And that awakening does not happen through clarity. It happens through recognition. Have you ever stared at an ancient image and felt your chest tighten, your breath shift, your sense of time bend inward? That's not interpretation. That's activation. Symbols bypass logic. They go straight to the architecture of the unconscious. They speak to the parts of you that were trained to forget what you once knew without question. In the mystery schools, this was sacred practice. Not decoding the symbol, becoming it. The initiate would live the glyph, enter the myth, take on the pattern, not as belief, but as embodiment. Because the moment you understand a symbol only intellectually, you lose its power. But when you carry it, when it begins to shape your silence, your posture, your gaze, then it does its true work. It transforms, not the world, but the one who sees. In those ancient chambers, walls were covered in images not to impress but to initiate. A procession of animals, a star map etched in gold, a figure stepping from one world to the next, all encoded, all living. Because to step into a mystery school was to step into a living library, a library written not in books, but in frequency-encoded form. And the symbol was the interface. Some symbols were shown only once, some only in dreams, some only in absolute stillness, and some were never drawn at all, but passed in eye contact, in breath, in ritual movement, where the body itself became a glyph. The mystery schools didn't teach you what to think, they taught you how to see. And in that seeing, you began to remember that you are not outside the symbol. You are the symbol. Every part of you, your pain, your desire, your confusion, is a curve in the larger pattern. And when that truth begins to sink in, you understand why the symbol was never translated. Because translation limits, explanation contains, but the symbol expands. It meets you where you are, and then, very slowly, if you allow it, it pulls you inward, into mystery, into pattern, into yourself. The mystery schools protected this language, not out of secrecy, but out of reverence, because they knew to give away the symbol without the inner preparation is to invite distortion. Truth given too soon becomes dogma. So they waited. They let the symbol work on its own timeline. Because when the soul is ready, a single image can collapse the entire architecture of forgetting. One glyph, one dream, one inner vision can return everything, and in that return, there is no need to explain, only to listen, to soften, to enter. That is the true language of the mystery. They called it a ceremony, a rite, a performance, but it was not for show. It was never meant to be watched. It was meant to be endured. Because what happened inside the mystery schools was not theater as we know it. It was sacred disassembly. A ritual space where everything false was stripped away, and the one who entered was never the one who emerged. This was not metaphor. This was not story. This was death, not of the body, though sometimes the body did not return, but of the self you thought was real. That was the purpose of the rite. To die without dying, to face annihilation before the final breath, to meet the great mystery on inner terms, while the outer world still turned. The Greeks had Eleusis, the Egyptians had the rites of Osiris, the Gnostics, the Druids, the Orphics. Each lineage had its own version, but the structure was always the same. Descent, dismemberment, revelation, return. The initiate would enter a passage, a cave, a chamber. A sequence of symbolic acts would unfold. Masks, light, smoke, silence, figures draped in forgotten gods, whispers in forgotten tongues. And then a moment would come when the lights would go out, when the voice guiding them would fall silent, and the initiate would be alone, alone in the dark, in the silence, in the terror that arises when everything you ever believed begins to dissolve. Because that was the point. The mystery schools were not built to comfort. They were not built to inspire. They were built to destroy illusion. And the greatest illusion of all was the one the initiate carried inside. The one called I. That small, contracted, frightened identity that clings to name, to narrative, to meaning. The one that wants to be safe. The one that wants to be seen. It could not pass through the gate. Only when it cracked, when the ego collapsed under the weight of something vast, silent, and incomprehensible, could the rite truly begin. Because beneath the disintegration, something else stirred. Something ancient, something wordless, something real. It was not taught. It was not spoken. It was shown. Through a sequence of symbolic acts, the initiate was guided into confrontation with death, not as concept, but as felt reality. Sometimes through mock burial, sometimes through symbolic drowning, sometimes through silence so total it became otherworldly. And then, in the absolute center of the void, something opened. A door, an image, a memory not from this life, but from before all lives. The mystery was not a truth. It was a re-entry into a state of being beyond all identity. And from that place, the initiate did not rise victorious. They rose humbled, softened, clear-eyed, and forever changed. Because once you have died and returned, the world does not look the same. The trees speak, the stones hold memory, the breath feels ancient. The story you once believed you were living begins to fall away, and in its place, a stillness, a center, not defined, not claimed, but known. That was the purpose of this sacred theater, not to perform, but to reveal, to simulate death so completely that the soul could slip loose from its inherited bindings and look directly into the unspeakable. The gods were not worshipped in these rites. They were embodied, not as beings, but as states. The initiate became the dying god, the descent into shadow, the dissolution into void, and then the slow return into light. But this was not resurrection for glory. It was return in silence, return with new eyes, return as a different frequency. And once the rite was complete, nothing could be said, because what had changed was not the mind, it was the axis of being. You walked back into the world. You appeared the same, but the world felt different because you were now a temple, a chamber, a resonance, and those who stood near you could feel it, even if they could not name it. That is the truth of the mystery. It cannot be spoken, but it can be carried, and it is carried still. In the ones who have walked the ritual of death without dying, in the ones who know what it means to disappear and yet return whole. Not better, not higher, only truer. You thought it was about the priests, the sages, the ones in white robes, in hidden chambers, with voices full of ritual and smoke. But they were not the source. They were the interface. The mystery schools did not belong to them. They were servants, not masters, translators, not originators. Because behind the veil, beyond the symbols and the rites, stood something else. Not a man, not a god, not even a myth, but a presence. Something that could not be seen, only sensed. Something that did not speak in language, but in resonance. It was what they served, and they never said its name. Not out of fear, but out of reverence, out of precision, because this presence was not an entity in the way we understand it. It was not form, it was field, a living intelligence woven into the very fabric of the earth and beyond it. Not a spirit, not a god, a pattern, a memory, a current that moves through worlds but binds itself to none. Some called it Sophia, others the Logos. Some whispered of the aeons, the dreaming ones, the eldest light. But even these were just veils. What they served was not an external power. It was consciousness itself, before identity. It was not above us. It was not greater. It was simply prior. And the mystery schools were how it touched the world. Each school was a structure of transmission, a designed frequency chamber capable of interfacing with this deep, living presence that speaks only through silence, through alignment, through inner deconstruction. This is why the structures were so precise, why the rituals had to be followed exactly, why the rites often made no sense to the rational mind. Because they weren't for the mind. They were for the field, the architecture of the self. And when that self was properly prepared, the presence could enter, or more accurately, emerge from within. Because what was behind the mystery was not something you worshipped, it was something you recalled. But it could not be recalled, while the surface self remained intact. That's why the rites were violent, why the descent was non-negotiable, because only in the collapse could the greater structure be revealed. The mystery schools served this structure, not as religion, as resonance. They were built in specific locations, where ley lines crossed, where the earth's frequencies rippled, built with materials that could hold charge, built in proportions that matched cosmic ratios, not out of beauty, but out of necessity, because those proportions allowed the field to stabilize, to open, to listen. And when a human entered, fully emptied, fully surrendered, fully attuned, then and only then would the presence respond. Not with visions, not with words, but with a stillness so full, it changed you forever. This is the presence behind the mystery, not a deity, not a demon, not a savior. A pattern of being, older than form, older than creation, echoing still in those who dare to go deep enough to meet it. And perhaps it is not even singular. Perhaps it is a network of intelligences moving beneath the veil of human perception. Some have called them watchers, others architects, the builders, the hidden ones. But these too are metaphors, because what they are cannot be contained in language. They do not reside in temples. They are the temples. They are the vibrational structure that waits to be awakened in stone, in body, in soul. And every time a mystery school was built, it was not to house them, but to interface with them, to open a portal, not to another place, but to another state. And when that state was reached, the initiate could feel it. A sense of being seen from behind the veil, not judged, not measured, only known, wholly, utterly, beyond time. That is who they were really serving. Not a being, not a throne, but the original intelligence from which all consciousness unfolds. And when you know this, truly know it, something quiets inside, because suddenly you understand why the mystery was never written down. It could not be contained because it was never external. It is behind the veil, yes, but the veil is within you. You thought it was about the priests, the sages, the ones in white robes, in hidden chambers, with voices full of ritual and smoke. But they were not the source. They were the interface. The mystery schools did not belong to them. They were servants, not masters, translators, not originators. Because behind the veil, beyond the symbols and the rites, stood something else. Not a man, not a god, not even a myth, but a presence. Something that could not be seen, only sensed. Something that did not speak in language, but in resonance. It was what they served, and they never said its name. Not out of fear, but out of reverence, out of precision, because this presence was not an entity in the way we understand it. It was not form, it was field, a living intelligence woven into the very fabric of the earth and beyond it. Not a spirit, not a god, a pattern, a memory, a current that moves through worlds but binds itself to none. Some called it Sophia, others the Logos. Some whispered of the aeons, the dreaming ones, the eldest light. But even these were just veils. What they served was not an external power. It was consciousness itself, before identity. It was not above us. It was not greater. It was simply prior. And the mystery schools were how it touched the world. Each school was a structure of transmission, a designed frequency chamber capable of interfacing with this deep, living presence that speaks only through silence, through alignment, through inner deconstruction. This is why the structures were so precise, why the rituals had to be followed exactly, why the rites often made no sense to the rational mind. Because they weren't for the mind. They were for the field, the architecture of the self. And when that self was properly prepared, the presence could enter, or more accurately, emerge from within. Because what was behind the mystery was not something you worshipped, it was something you recalled. But it could not be recalled while the surface self remained intact. That's why the rites were violent, why the descent was non-negotiable, because only in the collapse could the greater structure be revealed. The mystery schools served this structure, not as religion, as resonance. They were built in specific locations, where ley lines crossed, where the Earth's frequencies rippled, built with materials that could hold charge, built in proportions that matched cosmic ratios, not out of beauty, but out of necessity, because those proportions allowed the field to stabilize, to open, to listen. And when a human entered, fully emptied, fully surrendered, fully attuned, then and only then would the presence respond. Not with visions, not with words, but with a stillness so full it changed you forever. This is the presence behind the mystery, not a deity, not a demon, not a savior. A pattern of being, older than form, older than creation, echoing still in those who dare to go deep enough to meet it. And perhaps it is not even singular. Perhaps it is a network of intelligences moving beneath the veil of human perception. Some have called them watchers, others architects, the builders, the hidden ones. But these too are metaphors, because what they are cannot be contained in language. They do not reside in temples. They are the temples. They are the vibrational structure that waits to be awakened in stone, in body, in soul. And every time a mystery school was built, it was not to house them, but to interface with them, to open a portal, not to another place, but to another state. And when that state was reached, the initiate could feel it. A sense of being seen from behind the veil, not judged, not measured, only known, wholly, utterly, beyond time. That is who they were really serving. Not a being, not a throne, but the original intelligence from which all consciousness unfolds. And when you know this, truly know it, something quiets inside, because suddenly you understand why the mystery was never written down. It could not be contained because it was never external. It is behind the veil, yes, but the veil is within you. Not all who entered sought truth. Not all who listened, listened with reverence. Some came to the mystery not to serve, but to possess. Not to be undone, but to control. And that is when it began to rot. Because the deeper the truth, the greater the temptation to use it for something else. Even the mystery was not immune to corruption. At first, it was subtle. A gatekeeper becomes proud of being a gatekeeper. A ritual becomes currency. A title becomes armor. And slowly the path of dissolution becomes a ladder of ascent. No longer about emptiness, no longer about transformation. Now about access, about status, about secret knowledge held close, guarded not for its sacredness, but for its power. Secrecy became a shield, then a weapon. The mystery, once offered in silence, was now withheld by design. Only the worthy, only the initiated, only the chosen. But chosen by whom? Not by the field, not by the unseen intelligence, but by human hands, human hierarchies, human ambition. And so the current began to twist. What once existed to dismantle the ego now became a way to inflate it. The priest became king, the initiate became ruler, the teaching became doctrine. And doctrine requires control. So the symbol was no longer a portal, it became a seal. Closed, guarded, used to exclude instead of awaken. You see, the power of the mystery is real. When a human being becomes a resonator, when they touch the living field, they carry influence. People follow them. Their presence shifts perception. They carry gravity. And gravity can be used. It can gather people. It can command belief. It can shape worlds. This is what tempted them. Not the truth, but the effect of truth. And when that temptation takes root, the mystery stops evolving. It becomes a system with layers, with passwords, with lines of succession, with punishments for heresy. The sacred becomes institution, and institution always protects itself before it protects the mystery. History is full of this inversion. We see it in Egypt, when the priesthoods began to consolidate power, to withhold rights from the people, to align themselves with kings instead of with silence. We see it in Rome, when the early Gnostic impulses were absorbed, edited, flattened into a state religion. We see it in secret orders, where once transformative rites became hazing rituals meant to enforce obedience rather than dissolve identity. Because power, once tasted, rarely releases itself willingly. And yet, even within these distortions, something survived. A pulse, a signal, because no matter how tightly you close the doors, the field does not belong to you. It cannot be contained. It cannot be owned. It lives beneath the structure, behind the corruption, inside the silence. No ritual can counterfeit. Some still found it, even in broken schools, even in hollowed-out orders. Some went deeper, past the ego of the priest, past the shell of the system, into the true chamber, the one within. And there they heard it again. The quiet vibration that cannot be used, cannot be hoarded, cannot be sold, because it only speaks when all power has been laid down. This is why the mystery is still alive, even after being betrayed. Because no matter how many grasp for it, those who truly listen will always hear the difference. The mystery does not speak to domination, it withdraws. It becomes invisible to those who seek to control, and waits for the one who will kneel, not to a god, not to a teacher, but to the unmaking, to the fire that does not warm, but burns away the mask, to the truth that gives no comfort, but reveals something eternal. This is the safeguard of the mystery. It cannot be corrupted at its core. Only its clothing, only its outer forms. The initiates who served truth, let it be taken, let it be desecrated, because they knew the real chamber is invisible, and those who try to own it never find it. They build temples of authority, but the mystery walks elsewhere, always just out of reach to the hand that would grasp, always just within reach to the heart that would surrender. The temple doors are gone, the names forgotten, the rites scattered to the wind. The mystery schools vanished, or so it seems, because while the stone crumbles, the thread remains. Not in libraries, not in vaults, but in the places few ever think to look. In the dream you can't forget, in the symbol that haunts you, in the book you opened at random and wept. The mystery never dies, it simply changes form. Like a serpent shedding its skin, it leaves behind what no longer serves and slips into silence, waiting for those who can feel without needing proof. We call it intuition, synchronicity, a strange pull toward symbols we don't understand. But it is more than that. It is the thread, the invisible line that moves through lifetimes and landscapes, binding seekers not by belief, but by resonance. You begin to sense it when the outer world feels thinner, when ordinary explanations no longer satisfy, when you stop asking, "What can I know?" and start whispering, "What have I forgotten?" That is the return. Quiet, subtle, sacred. It begins not in temples, but in moments. A conversation that opens something unnameable. A silence that feels full instead of empty. A dream that feels like a memory from before this life. The mystery does not need buildings. It only needs readiness. And readiness is not created, it is recognized. When the soul is ripe, the thread becomes visible, not with the eyes, but with the body, the breath, the inner ear. You hear it in patterns, in rhythms, in the way certain images light something inside you. A spiral, a gate, a torch held aloft. And suddenly, you are no longer seeking new information. You are remembering something older than language. This is how the mystery has returned. Not with rituals, but with recognition. The ancient symbols rise again, not in temples, but in art, in film, in dreams, in stories. They move through us, as if seeking new forms, to carry the same old light. Because the mystery does not cling to tradition, it migrates. It finds those who are attuned, not in knowledge, but in frequency. It returns through the cracks, through the quiet ones, through the misfits and sensitives who feel too much and cannot explain why. You do not need a teacher. You do not need a robe. You need only to notice what keeps calling you back. Back to silence, back to slowness, back to something sacred and unnamed. The thread is alive again, and it moves differently now. It does not gather in hidden orders. It moves through shared glances, through strange awakenings, through the sense that someone, somewhere, is dreaming you awake. We are scattered, but we are not alone. Each time one person stops and listens and lets go of the need to explain, the thread strengthens. And when you follow it, you find others, not gathered around an altar, but around a shared knowing that doesn't need to be spoken. And sometimes you will walk into a place, a forest, a cave, a rooftop, and feel it. A hum, a warmth, a stillness too complete to describe. And you'll know the field is present here. The mystery is awake, not because someone built a temple, but because you came with reverence. This is the future of the thread. Not formal, not hierarchical, not held by gatekeepers, but passed, breath to breath, glance to glance, dream to dream. And when enough carry it, the mystery will begin to speak again. Not in the old ways, but in a new tongue, one made of vibration, of felt truth, of sacred presence. And those who carry it will not call themselves initiates. They will call themselves human. But something in their stillness will carry the weight of the stars. It's easy to assume they served gods, easy to believe they were priests to powers unseen, keepers of sacred rites, servants of temples, myths, and divine figures etched in stone and memory. But that's not the whole story, not the true story. Because beneath the images of Isis and Osiris, beneath the rites of Demeter, beneath the veils of Thoth, Inanna, Dionysus, Mithras, there was something else. Something older, something vaster, something not personified, but moving. The mystery schools were not ultimately serving religion. They were not built for the glory of pantheons. They were not institutions of worship. They were conductors, instruments built to carry, a current that had no name, a current that ran not through gods, but through consciousness itself, a current that sought only one thing, evolution. The true mystery, the one behind the symbols, the rituals, the silence, was not an entity. It was a force, a cosmic pull toward the unfolding of awareness, the slow, sacred expansion of what it means to be. The mystery schools served this force, not as slaves, not as puppets, but as voluntary bridges. They were places where consciousness could look back at itself, where the veil could be thinned, where time could bend and the soul could remember that it was not born in this world, only passing through it. Those who kept the rites knew they were not there to preserve tradition. They were there to anchor emergence, to make space in the human system for something not yet human to arise. Not alien, not foreign, just future. The mystery was the vessel through which the next stage of being could begin to unfold in the hearts of the ready. This is what they were really serving: the evolutionary intelligence of life itself. Not an ideal, not a utopia, not enlightenment, but the sacred process by which awareness becomes deeper, more precise, more whole. It was never about information. It was never about revelation. It was about capacity. Could the initiate hold more presence? Could the body sustain more light? Could the system be emptied enough to allow the unknown to take root? Because what the mystery ultimately offered was not knowledge, it was density of being. And those who served it knew the cost. They offered their lives to this unfolding, not because they were pure, not because they were chosen, but because they could feel the call from the future resonating backwards through time, pulling them forward, not toward reward, but toward integration. This is the truth the temples held: that the gods were masks, the rites were maps, and the initiates were bridges. And behind it all, behind every chant, every symbol, every chamber carved in sacred stone, was a question: can human beings become more than human? Not through conquest, not through escape, but through surrender, through the quiet, lifelong act of allowing the mystery to unfold through them. Because evolution doesn't happen to you, it happens as you. And when the mystery schools initiated their students, they weren't passing on knowledge. They were activating potential on behalf of something so large no language can hold it. Call it Sophia, call it Logos, call it Source. But what they served was the silent intelligence of becoming. And they did so not with pride, but with humility. Because the mystery did not need worshipers, it needed willing vessels. And those who said yes did not become special. They became transparent, so that the current could move through them and touch the world. That was the real initiation, not into power, but into service without identity. You were not given a crown, you were given a frequency and asked to carry it in a world that would not recognize it. Because the mystery serves only one master: the unfolding of consciousness into fuller coherence. And those who serve it in return live quiet, luminous lives, often unnoticed, often alone. But their presence leaves echoes in the fabric of reality, because they are not teaching, they are transmitting. From future to now, from silence to form, from the unseen into the field we call the human world. And one day, someone walks past them, feels something shift, and doesn't know why. That is how the mystery still moves, not in thunder, not in prophecy, but in the gentle expansion of presence, through those who remember who they were really serving all along. There is no temple now, no stone altar, no priest in linen robes, no incense rising toward a painted dome. The school is gone, the outer school. But the real one? It has only changed form. Because the mystery never needed architecture, it only needed a vessel, a place to move, to whisper, to unfold. And now, that place is you. The school has moved inside. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. It lives in your nervous system, in your moments of stillness, in the way your breath pauses before truth and deepens in its presence. You do not need to pass through stone gates. You pass through experiences now, through loss, through longing, through the quiet, private devastations that strip you bare and leave you changed in ways no one else can see. These are the new rites, not dramatized, not performed, but felt deeply, intimately. The initiations now come as breakings, as betrayals, as moments of unmaking so personal no one else even knows they're happening. But they are. You feel it. The soft collapse of who you thought you were, the gentle death of the old voice, the strange, tender sense that something is being born in you with no name and no instruction. That is the mystery. It lives in you now, not as knowledge, but as space. A kind of spaciousness inside you that wasn't there before, a silence that is not empty but watchful. It sees without needing to grasp. It listens without needing to respond. You carry the resonance of an ancient thread woven into the very shape of your presence. And you don't need to know the teachings. You don't need the language, because your life itself has become the ritual. Each time you choose truth over comfort, each time you listen instead of speak, each time you soften when you could defend, the school breathes through you. It teaches in your silence. It transmits in your gaze. It leaves footprints in your stillness. And others feel it. They don't understand why they're drawn to you, why they feel calm around you, why their defenses drop in your quiet company. They are not drawn to you. They are drawn to the field you carry. The field of the inner school. The living mystery. This is the new temple, not made of stone but of presence, not shaped by rituals but by repetition. The repetition of showing up, of listening, of surrendering again and again to what is real, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. And in this surrender, the school is rebuilt. Not once, but daily. Every moment you choose coherence. Every time you align with what you know, but cannot explain. You are walking the halls again, but this time, they are inside you. And now, you begin to notice others. Eyes that meet yours with recognition, souls you've never met, who feel strangely familiar. You're not imagining it. You're seeing others in whom the mystery is waking. Scattered lights in a world that's forgotten the stars. Together, without banners, without creeds, you are rebuilding something older than history and newer than breath. A school not of knowledge, but of frequency. A transmission passed in silence, in presence, in the gentle way you hold the truth without needing to teach it. Because now you know, the mystery does not need students. It needs carriers. And you are one. Not because you tried, but because something called you, unmade you, reassembled you in the shape of its own unfolding. And now, when someone asks, "Where is the temple? Where is the path?" you smile. You say nothing, or maybe just this: "It's here," in the pause, in the breath, in the stillness we meet beneath the noise. The temple lives, the thread continues, the school remains. And it moves as you